This video goes with the hydrothermal vent assignment and is an introduction to the Chapter 15 notes. Chapter 15 is all about the history of evolution and the idea that the organisms that we see alive on our planet today are related through evolution to those that lived on the planet millions or billions of years ago. Scientists date the origin of Earth to be about 4.5 billion years ago, and scientists have found evidence of life existing on the planet 3.5 billion years ago. This evidence of life they call a stromatolite. Organisms that lived back on Earth 3.5 billion years ago were super simple, so not like a squirrel that you would think of today, but rather one single cell without a nucleus, kind of like what we think of bacteria would be today. They call these organisms stromatolites, and they have found fossil evidence of these stromatolites, fossil evidence of these bacteria cells in rocks. The bacteria cells lived in layers, almost if you think of like stacked pancakes, where we've got the oldest fossils on the bottom layer because wind and rain carries sediment on top of them. So these organisms lived long ago, 3.5 billion years ago. There is evidence of that in these rock fossils, but it's a little bit hard to think about the planet so long ago. It's hard for any human to even conceptualize how long ago 3.5 billion years ago was, like a really, really long time. So the questions that we're going to start to explore in Chapter 15 is, how did the first living cell arise 3.5 billion years ago? And to be honest, scientists do not have the answer to that question. That is still a major mystery in terms of biology. How did the first living thing come to be? There's all these non-living components like rocks, methane gas, nitrogen gas, water. Well, how from those non-living things do you suddenly have a cell that can live and reproduce? Question number 2 is a little bit more easily answered. It's, how could any organism live in such terrible conditions? Early Earth was really, really rough. Early Earth didn't really have an atmosphere, so it was continually bombarded by things from space like asteroids and whatnot. Also, at the time of early Earth, there were no plants, right? No living things, so there was no oxygen in the air. Also, those giant tectonic plates were moving around the planet just like they are today, but they were causing a lot of volcanic eruptions, releasing all of these gases that if you and I were breathing in those gases today, we would definitely die. Because of the lack of the atmosphere, there was a lot of UV light hitting the planet, so like no protective layer around the planet. So it was really, really tumultuous compared to our more pleasant environment around today. We are going to look at the hydrothermal vents in order to get a better idea of how organisms can survive in these rough conditions. Hydrothermal vents are located at the bottom of the ocean floor, so really deep underwater where there is no oxygen and no sunlight. The hydrothermal vents are where two tectonic plates are moving apart, and since they're moving apart, there's all these gases coming from the core of Earth up through those hydrothermal vents. So no light, no oxygen, very rough conditions, but yet there are organisms that live on the ocean floor down there and can eat and reproduce with all of these seemingly deadly type things around them. So in the hydrothermal vent assignment, we're going to take a look at that really rough environment because it's the closest environment that we have on Earth today that simulates what early Earth might have looked like. To conclude this video, there were two scientists, Miller and Urey, who tried to see, could they get a living cell to arise from things that were not living? And unfortunately, they were not successful. So they set up this apparatus you see here and tried to simulate what early Earth looked like. Early Earth was really hot, so they had a flame. early Earth contained water, and early Earth contained all of these gases coming from volcanic eruptions. Essentially, what they tried to do was put a bunch of non-living things in this apparatus, shoot it with some electricity to represent the lightning that was occurring, and then they studied a sample from that water to see, were there any cells in that sample? Could they get life to arise from non-living things? And the answer was no, they couldn't. They did, however, make the building blocks of proteins. We call those amino acids. So they were able to make compounds that are found in living cells, but they were not able to actually get a living cell from non-living things. Even though this experiment was a failure, it's considered to be the best model we have of an experiment that could simulate early Earth. So for the remainder of this assignment, you'll research hydrothermal vents, the goal of which is to get an idea of how difficult conditions were on early Earth, and then also to see what types of organisms can survive in these supposedly deadly type environments compared to what we think of as normal Earth today.